Ever since the days of Pong, video games have tremendously grown in size with their worlds, stories, and presentations. It's funny to think how far games have come in such a short time, while they still continue to make new milestones to this day. Like for example, with virtual reality, where it's becoming possible to simulate what we play. And while it still has a ways to go in terms of functionality, it's amazing to see what we have achieved and what we can achieve. And it's also interesting to realize that while games continue to get bigger and even more ambitious, their physical size has continued to go down throughout the years. Just take a moment to realize that a game like Breath of the Wild can fit on a cartridge that's no bigger than the size of a Lego brick. However, after all these major advancements with both hardware and software, there's been a significant decay in one of the oldest necessities of gaming: manuals. Now that may sound like nonsense, but honestly, over the past few years, manuals have become a shadow of what they once were. You see, manuals are very interesting with what they could do for the player. They managed to inform us about not only how the game works, but they could also give us insights on the world the game takes place in and the characters that could be met throughout the journey. Manuals could give more than just an idea of what was to come from the experience, but they would explain things in a much more convenient way. Instead of having the game give the player numerous amounts of tutorials to explain a task or how to use an ability, you could just easily look it up in the manual. Now, it's become common knowledge by a lot of people that games have progressively begun holding the player's hand a lot more. This could be because of an over-reliance of tutorials or limitations and boundaries put on the player, possibly soiling their experience as a result. And those problems could be blamed on younger people who just started playing video games or just poor design in general. But a lot of that blame should be pointed towards the developers for not letting the manuals explain things more than the game itself. Though of course there are many games that still have manuals and may or may not have an overabundance of in-game tutorials. I'm not saying every modern game is guilty of these accusations, but what I am saying is that using the manual is honestly a much better way to teach the player, and developers should rely on them more because they're completely optional and cut down the amount of assessment that occurs. With a game like Super Mario World, it will give the player a little bit of story before putting them right into the action. It doesn't waste any time with a setup and just goes straight to the point, while leaving anything the player wants to know about, like power-ups or the setting, in the manual. But if you want a more recent example, take Mario 3D Land, which has a similar process by starting with a small dose of story, then just letting the player do their thing. Now granted, Mario isn't the most story-driven and complex series out there, but it does tend to have these problems when it does something new or has a spin-off. See, Nintendo was the reason why my interest in this topic sparked, for they are a very good example of developers who are starting to give up on manuals. Now Nintendo used to be amazing with manuals. They were very thorough, informative, and just enjoyable to read. But I say used to because of their recent track record. First, they began having their manuals be digital, which isn't a bad idea. It can save on paper and prevents people from losing them. But it's becoming worse with what they're doing with the Switch, where games don't even have physical manuals and require the developers to enable digital ones. And although games like Mario Kart 8 and ARMS are rather simple and easy to get the hang of, think of something like Splatoon 2, which has so many different things the player learns in-game, like maps, strategies, weapons, and equipment. Don't you think it would be simpler for the player if they were given a manual? That way it could seem easier to understand and not have the game waste so much time explaining everything. And I don't really mean to target Nintendo here, because I'm sure this problem is apparent with other companies. But seeing as how they've gone from having amazing manuals to having digital ones to basically not having them at all, it kind of makes me criticizing their actions justified, for they're starting to prevent the players from learning about the game before actually turning it on. But the truth is, because we live in a world where if you want to learn something about a game, it's becoming much more convenient to look it up online than it is to find it in the manual. Now that sites like GameFAQs and IGN exist, developers seem to expect players to use them more because of their reliability. As a species, we're always evolving, and one of the main things about evolving is to make life more convenient. Manuals played a large role for a very good amount of time, but now that time seems to be going away, and it's because people are finding more convenient ways to learn about their games. So judging by the situation with the Switch, as well as computer gaming becoming more popular, which hardly has them in the first place, manuals seem to be reaching their ends someday rather soon. Though whether or not that's a good thing, at least we know there are more practical sources of information out there, like online walkthroughs or even Let's Plays, since they have the ability to be more thorough and expansive when talking about a game than its booklet could have been. Though for the people who still have the manuals to their games, it'd be a very good idea to hold on to them. Used games can usually cost a lot more if they have their manuals, so if you ever wanted to sell games and actually make a profit off of it, make sure it has everything that came with it. I remember when I was younger, I used to throw out all the manuals for the GameCube and DS games and kick his ass for doing it. Well, now that I got sidetracked, it may be a good time to end the video. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you later.